A little while back, a BR Standard 4 locomotive arrived at the Mid-Ants from the scrapyard or from another railway to be done up, and it's currently, they're progressing very well, having built a new tender. Things are looking good, that it should be possibly near running in the next couple of years. I looked back through my records of my time as a fireman at Eastleigh, and I found 6 trips logged on the engine, 75079. And one of those trips I did the driving with Des Reardon from Eastleigh to Salisbury. But the longest and most interesting trip with the engine was a late turn freight from Eastleigh to Feltham Yard, and we returned light engine. On Monday the 3rd of May 1965, I moved up a link into number 4, the Holly Relief Gang, where I was going to remain until the end of steam working in 67. This link covered men on leave in all other links at the shed, including the top links. And on my first link in the day, you had a regular driver, but because you were covering holiday and absence, you very often worked with other men. And by this time, I'd got a little bit of experience under my belt and could cope with the differences. So, as I say, on my first day in the link, I was booked with a gentleman called Ernie Osmer, and he was a really nice guy. I'd never worked with him before, but I had met him obviously around and about in the mess room and spoken to him. And we were booked to sign on at 6 in the evening and work number 260 duty, actually, as his fireman was on leave. And as is usual for me in those days, I arrived at the shed about 45 minutes early. Whenever I got an engine to get ready, I always got there early because it meant you didn't rush around trying to find all the tools and gear that you needed. I'd noted the details of the turn the day before, and after signing on with the time clerk, I checked with the running foreman to make sure the job had not been cancelled. And he said that my engine was 7579 and told me where it was in the shed. The book preparation time for a standard loco was 55 minutes, but with a shortage of tools and equipment at the time, if you wanted a good start, you got to work early. And I went straight to the engine, and after checking the state of the boiler and the fire and noting what tools were required, I took the oil box to the stores to draw the oil ration. I knew all the storemen very well. When I was there as a senior cleaner, one of the perks was to do the store's runner's job, which was a good labourer's rate of pay, and I was often earning more than my dad doing that. But I got to know the guys really well, and it was always good for a couple of extra white cloths, little niceties like that, which went down well with your driver. So I went to the stores and got the oil supply for the engine out for the day, and then went back to the engine and filled the driver's oil can, or feeder as it was known, and leave it in a prominent position in the cab with a new folded cloth on the top for the driver to find and start his oiling round. I would then take the 2 bottles and fill the mechanical lubricators up on the framings, the walkways on each side of the boiler, for him, checking the smoke box and tightening the door on the way down. These little gestures were often well received by most drivers and could often mean the difference between an average and a good day. If a driver had if he'd got out of bed the wrong side, wasn't feeling a bit grumpy, by the time he got to work and you'd done a bit of his work for him, they were a lot happier, and often it would result in you doing a little bit of driving. Anyway, and it was now time to attend to all the things I had to do to complete my part of the prep. Start to build the fire, clean and fill the lamps, check the tender water level, trim the coal, clean the gauge glasses, wipe the boiler backhead, cladding down, and the 101 other things to do before you leave the shed. And you did all that in 55 minutes and still had time to make a can of tea. The final task would be to test the injectors and wash the footplate down whilst topping up the boiler, and move outside the shed to the water column and fill the tender. And at 6:55, we went off shed up to the depot exit to ring out on what was called the Walker's Rotary Tablet Describer. A lovely bit of kit. I'd love to get hold of one. Beautiful bits. Anyway, this lets Eastleigh West Box know that we're going to go to the top end mast and yard. And when the dummy cleared, we run through the station, stopping outside East Box for the drop back into the yard. And shortly after 7 p.m, we buffer up to our train, and whilst I hook on and put the echo right, the guard gives Ernie the details of the load. Again, another full load with 10 back and brake head on the train. And this information would relayed to the driver simply as 56 equal to 60, 10 back. The weight of the train would only become apparent when you try and move it. And as soon as this exchange has taken place, the guard starts to walk back to his brake van. We would touch the whistle, and the yard ground frame signalman, very likely Bud Wheeler, 12-hour night, he'd know that we were ready to move. And shortly he'd give us a green hand signal. And at 7:30, Ernie would open the regulator, gently stretching out the couplings, and ease the train out of the yard onto the departure road. I would look back along the train, and when I see the brake van appear, I'd wave a white light side to side, and the guard would wave a light back to let me know he was on board and everything was in order. And I'd tell Ernie the guards is okay, and off we would go along the departure road past East Yard to the Albrook End exit, where we would receive a clear signal to proceed across all lines onto the upslope towards Shawford. Ernie would open the engine up a bit more, as this move is obviously going to stop all traffic on all up and down roads until we're clear. Once we got the train out onto the main line on the upper local line, I would tell Ernie that I could see the brake van and everything was all in order behind us. And he would now open the engine up and ask for a bit more effort to accelerate the train. The engine would clear her throat, and she would dig in and start this marvellous movement that two-cylinder engines often make, where they move gently from side to side as they're starting to really pull hard. It's a really lifelike motion. After putting a few shovelfuls over the heap towards the front of the door, I'd look back and watch the train. But because of the noise on the footplate, these messages were often conveyed in three ways. You'd give him a visual thumbs up, and a cheerful tone of voice, and a verbal, all with us, Ern, and that would be his indication that we're away. And we were now into it, really, because the next sort of 17 or 18 miles was all uphill to Litchfield Tunnel. As the speed built up, I would adjust the dampers and put a few more shovelfuls around the box and just watch the steam pressure gauge, make sure it's going the right way. And the needle started to rise. I would put the injector on and just cut it back as fine as possible. And for the next 15 to 20 minutes, you could put 2 or 3 shovelfuls over the heap and just close the door partly, keep the footplate swept up, occasional splash round with a slacking pipe to keep the dust down. We would turn it onto the up main at Shawford, and by Sink Cross box, we're probably up to around 35, 40 mile an hour and do quite well. And it is getting dark now, and the sparks fly out the chimney as we sail through Winchester in a cloud of smoke, steam and dust, with 56 wagons rattling and clattering along behind. And shortly I'd spot the distance from Winchester Junction and call it clear to Ernie. And as we pass the junction box, crack the door open and wave to the signalman full of confidence. As we curve to the right to Waller's Ash Tunnel, look back along the train, check all is in order, and you can see the white side lights of the brake van flickering through the glowing blue. Approaching the tunnel, I catch sight of Waller's Ash distant, and it's off, clear, so we're not going to be put inside Waller's Ash Good Loop tonight. And on we go past Western and Mitchell Dever, Ernie and me and the engine working as a team. After clearing the Popham tunnels, I can start to cut down my firing rate as we're approaching Roundwood Box and the summit of the climb at Litchfield. And as we turn the top of the bank, Ernie eases the regulator and shortens the cut-off. With a nod and a wink to me, he's quite obviously quite happy with that. And the train trundles on past Waltham, Steventon and Wootton boxes, and I wash the footplate down again and put some hot water in the bucket to cool a bit so we can have a quick wash up at Basingstoke. We rumble over Battledown flyover, and Ernie would gently apply the engine steam brake to buffer up the train. And then he applies the back and brake to reduce our speed to 15 mile an hour to enter the reception road for Basingstoke Yard at Winklebury. and shortly afterwards we'd come to a stand at the stop board outside the shunter's cabin. We would drop off a few wagons, pick up some more, take some water, and most importantly make another can of tea. Around 9:50, with the train remarshalled to 59 equal to 70 wagons, we'd pull out of Basingstoke Yard bound for Feltham. The next section through Hook, Winchfield and Fleet to Farnborough will be fairly easy running on a gentle undulating straight strip. And once we have the engine set up, and Ern and I can have a cup of tea, and I even manage a sandwich between sessions with a shovel, and occasionally look back to check the train and the brake van are still with us. After passing Sturt Lane Junction, under the Basingstoke Canal Aqueduct, a short rise takes us through Deep Cut before starting the long downhill stretch past Burbright Junction and Brookwood. It's now around 10:55. We get the road through Woking, as there's not much about this time of night. Passing through to the next station, West Byfleet, and Ern starts to get hold of them in preparation for branching left off the main line at West Weybridge, now Byfleet and New Hall. Approaching the station, he sees a left-hand signal clear for the Chertsey Road and allows the engine to take the junction at around 15 miles an hour. I cross the cab to stand behind him and watch the train follow us safely through the junction. Ern looks ahead to pick up the signals for Addleston Junction on the long left-hand curve, passing over the River Way. Spotting greens, he once more gently stretches the train out and accelerates past Cox's Lock and on through Addleston towards Chertsey. I'm now very much in the dark, both practically and figuratively, as this is my first trip over the Feltham Road. Ern tells me to keep the firebox fairly well filled up, as after Chertsey we have a fairly sharp climb up to Line Crossing before dropping down to Virginia Water. Now, this station was a classic example of the skill and knowledge required to work long, heavy, loose-coupled freight trains. From Line Crossing, there's a falling gradient for about a mile before reaching the sharp 15-mile-an-hour curve through the up-branch platform at Virginia Water. We will then pass over the trailing junction on a slight rising gradient before joining the up Reading line, where the gradient again starts to fall towards Egham. Mishandling a train at a length of ours over this short stretch of line could cause a nasty snatch which could enter the guard or result in a breakaway. On passing Line Crossing, we feel a slight jolt as the guard applies his handbrake, and Ernie slows to 15 well before the speed restriction at Virginia Water, and he carefully releases the brakes, and as we enter the curve, he has the coupling stretched out. He pulls the train through the station and across the junction without the slightest hint of a snatch, and once again I look back and tell him when the brake van clears the junction, and away we go again. The next stretch to Staines has a number of level crossings, 5 in all. Most are manned and have protecting signals. This requires great concentration on the part of the driver and my assistance to help spot the distant signals, and Ern would tell me where to look out to see them. Through Staines, there's another tricky series of speed restrictions and gradients and reverse curves. On the approach, we pass over Thorpe Lane Crossing on a rising gradient, enter a 40-mile-an-hour left-hand curve, and in less than a quarter of a mile, we pass over the Thames Bridge, restricted to 20 miles an hour, and immediately enter a sharp right-hand curve on a falling gradient. 300 yards further on, we pass over the trailing junction with the Windsor line and through the station on the left-hand curve. Once again, it's essential to keep the couplings tight as the train stretches over 3 changes of gradients and curves. There's also considerable drag caused by over 100 wheel sets binding against the running and check rails of these curves, and it was a true test of teamwork. Skill and knowledge and route knowledge of both driver and guard come into play. For my part, I'm carefully monitoring the boiler water level and looking back along the train for signs of any problem. Now we're on the home stretch for Feltham, and Ernie advises me that we should have enough on the fire and to start letting the water come down to keep her quiet in Feltham Yard. A few minutes after passing through Ashford, we spot the distant Feltham West at caution, and Ern shuts off steam to allow the speed to fall away on the approach to the station. The subsidiary signal is cleared for the yard, and we run slowly along the reception road, stopping outside alongside the shunter, who kindly uncouples the engine for me. And it's now 11:45, and plan A was to turn the loco and get away back light to Eastleigh as quick as possible. Unfortunately, the shunter tells us that a mishap has put the loco turntable out of use, and as we haven't formulated a plan B and we need water, we run the engine onto the shed disposal pit and put the water pipe in the tender. The guard, who's begged to ride back on the engine, takes charge of the water column control valve whilst Ernie disappears with the tea can to see the running foreman. I drop the front half of the fire and give the back half a good shake up, pull some coal forward. Who knows, we might be asked to assist something on the way back, ever the optimist. As the guard and I finish sorting out the engine, Ernie returns with a tea and a Feltham driver. Plan B is for the Feltham man to conduct Ernie via Feltham Junction to Hounslow, reverse, cross over, and run back via Hounslow and Witton Junction to Twickenham. This will use a triangle to turn the loco, and we will return down road destination Eastleigh. Whilst this will take a little longer, it will also add about 7 miles to the overall mileage and may well put us in a higher mileage bonus pay band. Every cloud has a silver lining, etc. Plan B is duly put into effect, and passing the depot on our way back from Twickenham, we stop to set down our conductor driver. The object now is to get back to Eastleigh Shed as quickly as possible. The maximum speed for a tender engine running light was at that time 55 miles an hour. It will suffice to say that it's a good job that nobody looked too closely at the signal box register point timing. It's quite difficult to drink a cup of tea and eat a sandwich at 60 plus miles an hour. The guard, having tried sitting on the shovel plate of the tender, decided it was more comfortable to stand behind Ernie. We eventually arrived back at Eastleigh at 3:40 a.m. and after dropping the guard off at the station, run along the depot entrance road and stop on the boiler blowdown pit. John, the blowdown man, shatters the early morning silence with a full-bore, half-a-glass blowdown before adding his mysterious water treatment concoctions to the tender water tank. As we move towards the big engine side disposal pit, we see the running foreman, Bob Candy, waiting to speak to us. We stop and Bob climbs up, looks over the door and says, "Do the fire for us, young Ben. Book a couple of hours. You must be short of men." We drop onto the pit and stop at the water column. Ernie climbs down from the cab, opens the ash pan upper door for me and hands the rocker bar back before having a quick look and feel round the loco. He then disappears towards the lobby to fill the ticket in, driver and farmer's timesheet, and to book any faults on an engine repair card. I get stuck in the job of cleaning the fire, and the time spent on the fire at Feltham now pays dividends, as it's not too dirty and clinkered up. About 10 minutes later, Ern calls out, "How you doing, Nipper?" On receiving a positive reply, he says, "See you tonight then," and he's away home. 20 minutes later, the fire's cleaned, and I do a final check round the cab. £160 on the water gauge, 3/4 of a glass of water, reverser in mid-gear, cylinder cocks open, handbrake hard on. I climb down off the engine and walk to the cabin, the mess room, and shortly the shed turning men will water the engine and move around the shed for a next turn of duty. After a quick wash at the big stone sink and a couple of mugfuls of water, I make my way to the bike shed, and on my way I look at the engineman's daily alteration sheet. In under 14 hours' time, I'm booked on, again with Ernie, on another first for me, a boat train from Southampton Docks to Waterloo. And so, at 4:30 a.m., nearly 11 hours after cycling through the shed gate, and with a 145-mile round trip on 75/79 behind me, I mounted my trusty treader and cycled off up Campbell Road. I've now got an 8-mile ride home to Woolston before a quick snack, a bath, and bed for most of the day. It was a long, hard night, and I can't imagine anyone wanting to do it today, or would they? Promotion to the Holiday Relief link opened up a whole new world of adventure insofar as that you got to work with a lot of guys right across the spectrum, from the low links right up to the top link men, which sometimes could be a bit of a problem with some of the old guys, but in the main they were pretty good. On the second day that I was in the link, which was Tuesday the 4th of May, after my marathon trip to Feltham and back, I signed on around 5:35 in the evening for a special 7 duty. And once again, it was Ernie Osmer because his mate was on holiday. And special 7 showed us to prepare a locomotive and run light to Southampton Western Docks and work a boat train with passengers from the line of France to Waterloo. And on arrival, we were booked relief by 9 hours men and then travel passenger back to Eastleigh. So around 4:45, I cycled through the gate from Campbell Road, over the crossing by the turntable to the bike shed, and parked the old trusty treader. And as I walked to the checkers office by the water treatment tower, my shiny boots crunched on a layer of smokebox ash laid down like volcanic debris over the 60 years or so since the shed was built. I say about my shiny boots, I had my near white pressed overalls on. I had all my badges polished up because it was a bit of a special day, my first boat train to London. Anyway, in the time office, Percy Eames, the old non-clerical timekeeper, would record my presence in his signing on sheet, and the next stop would be the roster room to check which loco was booked to turn. And our engine was to be rebuilt Battle of Britain class 3482 615 Squadron. Apart from preparing the disposal duties, I'd never worked on her before, but during the next 11 months or so, I was to work on her several times and discovered she was one of the best light Pacifics left running at the time, in my opinion. Following her last turn of duty, she would have arrived on the big engine side disposal pit and had the smoke box and fire cleaned and been watered and coaled up and moved to the running shed. En route from the disposal pit, she would have been turned, if necessary, by the shed engineman on the triangular track at the south end of Eastleigh Shed Yard, known as Round the Angle, the turntable being too short to turn the Pacifics. And if she was serviceable with no reported serious defects, the running foreman, who was always a promoted driver, would allocate her to her next turn of duty. The shed engineman would place her in an appropriate position in the shed, and the steam raiser would visit the loco every 2 or 3 hours or so to ensure the fire was kept alight and there was sufficient steam and water to give the next crew a good start of their day. At this time, the industry was consuming vast amounts of coal, and the mines were struggling to keep up with demand, and Eastleigh was at the end of quite a long supply chain. Shed master Fred Hale would accept anything in the way of coal that he could get his hands on, and boy did we get some rubbish at times. However, on this particular day, luck was with me. Climbing into 3482's footplate, I found a large pile of small lumps of shiny black coal with brass-coloured flecks in it. And this was Yorkshire hard black, and the flecking was iron pyrites, sometimes known as fool's gold. How Eastleigh come by this stuff is a bit of a mystery. Its size made it more suitable for household fires than steam locomotives, and it burnt fiercely and quickly, and if careful use was not made of the dampers and fire door, it would make a smoke screen to rival a Navy destroyer. After stowing my jacket and bag in the tender locker, I checked the state of the boiler. A few minutes with the shovel transferred the heap of coal from the footplate into the firebox. The old steam ravers were never very fussy about clearing up after themselves. With the decks cleared for action, I began what had become a well-practiced preparation procedure. By the time Ernie arrived, I'd been to the stores for the oil ration and a couple of clean cloths and filled the lubricators for him. And whilst I was doing this and sweeping off the front of the loco, I found another little job to do. Mounted high on the front of 82 was a large headboard with the words French Line CGT painted on it. And with a sense of pride, I give that headboard a quick wipe over with my cloth. The first boat train. I started the generator, checked the lights, put the head coat up, the tail lamp on, checked the tools, detonators and flags, sandboxes, make up a bit of a fire, take water. And the only thing that didn't want doing was to crack up the coal and trim it this time. I don't know how we managed to do all that preparation work in 65 minutes and still find time to make a can of tea and have a wash up. At 6:40, we were at the shed exit, ready to run tender first to the new docks. Some 15 minutes later, we arrived at the dock gate and picked up the dock board pilotman who would accompany us to berth 103, where France, our train, and the passengers were waiting. Whilst I coupled up, our guard, one Clemmer Lane at Clapham Junction, gave her the details of the load. In latter years, as a driver on the Deuce at Waterloo, I found that Clem too had vivid memories of the day. It was also his first boat train job. Clem came over from the West Indies on the Empire Windrush in the 1950s. He was a good-natured, conscientious man with a great sense of humour. Cartwright, he used to say, I walked up that engine and saw this young fella in near white overalls and shiny boots, and I thought to myself, where's this young bloke from? Clem, it was a pleasure to know and work with you. The passengers joined the train, and the last of the luggage was loaded by the porters into the front van, and all the doors were shut and checked, and we were just about ready for the off. With the passengers and luggage on board and all doors closed, Clem informed the pilotman that he's ready to depart, and the pilotman tells Ernie we're ready to leave and walks to the front of the loco. He and another flagman exhibit red flags to the road traffic, and the pilotman also shows a green flag towards the loco. Ern touches a whistle and eases 3482 and our 11-coach train out of the shed, with both of us keeping a sharp lookout on our respective sides. The pilotman rides on the front footstep of the loco, and as we approach each road crossing, he runs forward to stop the traffic. Every pair of facing points is clipped and padlocked and attended by a flagman displaying a green hand signal. All in all, a very labour-intensive exercise. At the dock gate, the starting signal's cleared and the pilotman walks back to his cabin, and we pull round a sharp curve towards Millbrook's starting signal. I ladle a few more heap shovelfuls of the small coal under the door and round the back corners before looking out my side and telling Ern we've got the road. Next stop, Waterloo. Number 82 crosses the down roads and with Southampton up distance showing clear starts to accelerate to about 30 miles an hour before steam is shut off to coast through Southampton Station and Tunnel and round the 15-mile-an-hour curve between Tunnel Junction and Northern Boxes. As we round the curve, the distance signals from Mount Pleasant and St Denis are off and the real work begins. Timings for boat trains were fairly generous, but unlike modern steam special stock, most of the vehicles were fitted with plain white metal bearings. And this increased the drag on the drawbar quite significantly, and I was looking at a further hour or so intensive activity with a shovel, especially with the aforementioned small coal. On the plus side, it was pretty much a case of ladling it into the large heap under the far old door, and the natural vibrations of 3482 would do the rest. With the back damper and fire door cracked open and the injector singing away, the engine started to show just what a good one she was. Approaching Eastleigh at around 50 miles an hour or so, it was time to sit down and lean nonchalantly out the cab window just in case anybody was watching from the shed or platform. We were absolute shockers for doing this, and no matter how far down the pan things were, one tried to give the impression that everything was totally under control to any interested onlooker. However, the experienced eye of a senior man on the platform could often spot the telltale signs if all was not well. In the comments section of my diary, there is an entry. It's just said 250 good, indicating a good trip, and the journey probably flew by, as time does when you're enjoying yourself. However, I seem to remember one small occurrence towards the end of the trip which might have given Ernie a few anxious moments. Somewhere between Weybridge and Hampton Court Junction, it was a practice with fast trains, taking into account prevailing conditions, to start to think about running the fire and water down with a view to preventing the loco from blowing off and making smoke under the canopy at Waterloo. This would be much frowned on by those in authority. We were passing Rains Park when Ernie spotted two yellows cautionary signal aspect. Now, it was standard practice for most steam-hauled express trains to run on the up main fast line of Waterloo. However, any problem on the up fast between Wimbledon and Waterloo could result in all trains being diverted to the up slow line. And London side of Wimbledon is the flyover which carries the up slow over the up and down fast lines. The rising gradient to the summit of the flyover is 1 in 60, which is steep enough. However, the falling gradient of the flyover is 1 in 45, and it would be an extremely bold engineman who would put the smoke box of his engine down a 1 in 45 gradient with less than about 3/4 glass of water shown on the flat. The two yellows aspect could have indicated that we were to be diverted to the up slow, but I was blissfully unaware of this minor drama, and it transpired that we did in fact run fast line all the way to Waterloo. Running into the mainline platforms of Waterloo was quite tricky with a large boilered steam engine, as the right-hand curve makes it impossible for a driver on the left-hand side of the loco to see his final stopping point until the last few seconds. With over 500 tonnes to stop around 6 foot from the buffers, this required a great deal of skill and experience. As soon as we came to a stand at platform 11, I dropped down between the engine and train, split the brake pipes, put the engine vacuum hose on its dummy and shouted, "Ease up!" As the coupling went slack, I lifted it off the coach coupling hook. Job done. No health and safety about in those days. Climbing back onto the platform, I was a bit disappointed to see that temporary barriers had been placed around the front luggage van. This was done to allow the porters to unload the van before the passengers descended on it to sort out their belongings. But sadly, it meant I was to be denied the glory of standing proudly alongside my mate as a mere mortal walked past the engine to the platform exit. To some, these comments might suggest arrogance or vanity. Hopefully, most will gain some idea of the great pride that we took in our calling. As I rejoined the loco, our relief turned up. Them 9 Elms blighters always arrived after you've done the unhooking.
Footnote: this photograph shows rebuilt Battle of Britain class number 34082 615 Squadron as she takes water at Basingstoke on the 29th of August 1964. Built in September 1948, number 34082 was officially named at Guildford by Sir Malcolm Fraser on the 8th of October 1948. This was the last official BR naming of a bullied Battle of Britain class. Withdrawn from Eastleigh Shed in April 1966, number 34082 remained in store there until August before being towed to Cashmore's in Newport in September 1966, where she was broken up. Final mileage 69,386.